Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the J Free 906 podcast. We have Mike, Owen, and Shannon DeSalvo here tonight with you, and we have a special guest we're going to bring on in just a few minutes. How you guys doing tonight? Are you ready for this?
After you, Mike.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
Oh,
this is going to be pretty good.
God. Yeah, we were already having a little pre-show there. We were laughing so hard, my sides were already hurting. It's oh my goodness. So
I'm an engineer. I'm not conditioned for that much laughing.
Well, thank you all for joining us here tonight. We really appreciate you coming by for our hour and a half. We're going to have to keep this to an hour and a half tonight for this particular segment because there is a Q&A going on that's happening right after this. So, and Erik has a lot of work to do to get ready for that. So we're going to keep this to an hour and a half. I just did want to say real quick, if you haven't already, we'd love if you would subscribe to the channel and click on that notification bell so you know when we have new content coming out. And if you like the content of our show tonight, give us a thumbs up. We like that. It helps out a lot with the YouTube algorithms and all of that. So we appreciate that so very, very much. And I'm tell you, honored to have Shannon and Mike. We do the weekly episode review of the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and then we do these special shows like this one here on our Thursday nights, generally at 7:30. And I tell you what, I'm going to get right to it because we don't have a whole lot of time tonight to get with Erik, and we've got a lot of questions that people have submitted. We're going to do our best, folks, and I'm going to say if you want to bring up a question in the chat, you can do so, but we may or may not get to it. I've asked people to put these ahead, to submit them ahead of time, and I do have quite a few of them. We'll do our best to get through them tonight in the hour and a half that we have. But also, please remember, because some people ask questions on these that were pertaining to things we have not seen on TV yet. Erik cannot talk about certain things that have not aired that we have seen, like in the last few episodes, that we have a question about. If it may come up, he can't answer that. So keep that in mind as we go forward. All right. So without further ado, the principal investigator for the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, please welcome Mr. Erik Bard. Sir, you're still muted if you want to click that off real quick. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Well, you know how I'm doing. I'm the one to blame for all the side-splitting laughter, I understand.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, we were having a great time with that. Oh, my goodness. So, I guess some people know, some people don't know. And I'd like to start off tonight, first of all, by saying I'm honored to have you on. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. How did it come about that you were able to be part of this, being the principal investigator of Skinwalker Ranch?
Well, that's really neat. I wasn't expecting that question, but that's a good place to start. I had an existing relationship with the property owner, Brandon Fugel, going back to a project that I was brought in on actually several years prior. I want to say we made first contact in 2010, that time frame. And we worked together on a project that was, I would categorize as speculative in nature. It did touch on subjects of physics. And one of the things that I don't know if I should tell this story or not, but I think I will.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So I want you to picture. I mean, this is where when people meet, they're trying to figure out what the mindset is on both sides. And I remember initially having a discussion with Brandon that lasted quite a long time, introducing me to this project that we were working on, and or that he was working on rather, and we were planning on following up. I want to say the next Tuesday. I want to say this was a Thursday. We were going to meet next Tuesday, and of course Brandon in classic Brandon speak was like, "Well, Erik, are you ready to take this discussion to the next level?" That's very common for him to speak that way. And so I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'd like to find out more about your project." Well, so we were preparing to meet that following week. I have to say, after several text exchanges and so forth. 4 months later, we finally got around to introducing me to the context that he was working in. And what was really interesting is that in advance of that, that initial deep dive meeting, he was quite generously willing to put forth a retainer, which, folks know what that is. And I said, Brandon, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. Okay, so what's going to happen is I'm going to size up the problem and determine if I have anything to bring to this problem set. If there's anything I can do to help, I'm just really interested in the problem. And what's not going to happen is I'm not getting out of your car with this check. And so I folded that check up, put it in his cup holder, and I said, just let me see what you've got. And, I think that sort of set the tone for my engagement with that project. I did some computational modeling. I did some other things I won't get into. And when we brought that, I would say when we brought that project to a milestone, to an appropriate place to take a pause or close the work there, it was after a consummate effort. A lot of very late nights, and I think Brandon got familiar with my work style. It's a baptism of fire, and so years later, Brandon's reached out to me when he was contemplating purchasing the property. He's like, Erik Bard. His proposal was something along the lines of, I'm looking at possibly purchasing the ranch, and I'd like to know what you think about the idea of going out there and really just conducting kind of a blue sky, open field scientific investigation on these hundreds of acres. And how'd you like to move out there and do that? To which my response was, you first. And so after he purchased the property, there were some invitations to come out. I did not come out. There was a meeting that was held with some of the folks who were formerly involved with the ranch, who I felt probably would have something to share of a substantive nature. I was a quiet participant in the meeting, although I did get a chance to ask some questions. And the engagement with the ranch really started as just, again, another voluntary effort. It was really just something that was interesting to me, as I'm sure it would be to anyone listening to this conversation. Yep. And I just considered it a privilege to even see anything like data. Given all of the sensational narrative, who wouldn't want to look at the data? And as you guys now know, the amount of data that we got, or anything that we would call data, was pretty scarce. We didn't get a lot in the way of, I didn't see any video footage. I didn't really see anything of that would be a deep dive into the subject matter. Also, a lot of very speculative, some of it non-secular at the time to me, material. So again, just kind of gradually warmed up to the work. I know that's kind of a long answer, but I feel like that helps to set the context of why I'm engaged. It certainly had nothing to do with any public facing work or television or anything like that.
Right.
That was the trick that was played on you.
Ah.
It got you in, and then was like, by the way, there's going to be a series.
Well, famously or infamously, I was really not in favor of going down this pathway because I really feel like, given all of the themes and the memes and how controversial and how people engage with this stuff, there's so much sort of almost religious engagement with the material. I felt like it would be good for us to really just get our heads around what's going on at the ranch, vet what I have termed the inherited narrative. And, I envisioned probably doing a study of maybe 3-year duration, writing up a paper, coffee table material, really. And just, I didn't really see it becoming what it is today.
That's interesting too, because, now it has blossomed or bloomed or exploded, if you want to say, into this show that has captivated so many people, the viewing public that loves this kind of information. And, we're only getting a very small portion of the data that you get, obviously. And we're fascinated by it, and we're fascinated by what's happening there. Yes, there's some naysayers out there that are, oh, they're making stuff up and all that.
We need those people. We need them.
We actually do. But I tell them, I said, well, you obviously do not watch the show, because if you're going to sit there and say that kind of thing, you're not really paying attention. You're not truly paying attention to see what's going on out there. And that's the beauty of it, especially for somebody like me who spends a lot of time watching the shows and going through, because obviously we do the reviews, but there's so many. And again, I got my list of questions and I'm trying to figure out which one to go to first, simply because there's so much. But I tell you what,
we get to do this more than once if you want.
I hope so.
All right.
I really do.
We're going to hold you to
Perfect.
it. We've got it on
Yep.
record now.
Exactly.
Witnesses as well.
Eric said,
Yep. Write it down, everyone.
Got it down.
Hey, I can't promise you it'll be from here. It might be from the South Tower. It might be from Homestead too, or from up on the mesa. But
yeah, that's okay. We're out on the deck, where everybody meets when you have your first show meeting. You know what? I'm gonna let Shannon go first. Shannon, do you have a question that you'd like to?
Deer in the headlight. I don't
Ladies.
have a list in front of me. I always have lots of questions.
Well,
Eric
yeah.
knows this. I harass him.
you are the
quite
queen of
frequently.
lists.
Oh gosh. Well, I guess I can just go back to what you just said, because I think it's really important when Jeff mentioned that there's a bunch of naysayers and things, and you responded by saying that's important. Explain why you think that's important. I think it's important as well. And I think, if anything, it's like a litmus test for the culture at large.
Yeah.
But what do you think it's important?
Just this one question is an entire segment. Because look, and I want to go back to my interaction with Brandon, which goes back, as I just shared, many years. When Brandon decided to explore taking the work into the public domain, I gave him my opinion. I kind of deliver it in my own characteristic way, almost as a sermon. I say, listen, Brandon, you do realize that when you make this choice, you are changing fundamentally what the definition of the problem. The deliverables are now different, and that's fine. But I want you to understand that, I come from a consumer and scientific products development environment. I come from the world of physics. I'm a plasma and X-ray physicist. I develop technologies and so forth. And, doing quote unquote science, in a clean room environment is very different from something that you can sustainably do in front of a global audience. Okay. Yes, there can be some synergy, but you have to understand that now, as best, as I try to optimize this in my head, what really is the deliverable? And, I think I arrived at the answer then, that the deliverable was at best an elevation of the discourse on all of these different things. Goodness, look at all the themes and what I call the themes and memes that are touched upon at the ranch. We're coming into this, we're still vetting this narrative. And I think that part of that doesn't really come through maybe in the series, is that we're still trying to sort an entire litany of different phenomenological reports, different qualities, if you will, of data. And so, quite frankly, it reminds me of, I just imagine all these clippings on the cutting room floor of the making of the X-Files, for example, and that's Skinwalker Ranch, right? And so, I just said, look, this is a really hard problem. You're taking on a very hard problem. I appreciate the implicit confidence, but part of me wants to opt out of this. And in fact, I made a proposal. I don't know how many people know this, but my proposal was to put someone in my stead as the intrepid investigator. Okay, I had someone picked out who would actually look a lot better on camera, quite frankly, and probably be a lot more articulate. And what I would do in the background is feed the investigation substantive data and directions to go, and really, maybe do a cameo as the gardener in my bib overalls or whatever once in a while, just for a lark. Yes, I see you laughing, right? But really, that was how I wanted to do this. And one of the reasons, it wasn't even determined, even after we shot the first episode on site, it had not been determined that I was even going to be part of the series. other than maybe, do a video conference in, because I was really, I had some real moral compunctions about how I would be able to function in this environment. And I remember Kevin Burns, if you know that name, this is the godfather there he recently passed away, Prometheus Entertainment. He's the one that brings us Ancient Aliens. He's Oak Island. They did a fantastic redo of the Lost in Space. He's done a lot of work.
Yeah.
And the guy, I mean, he knows/knew everyone apparently in Hollywood. Really interesting character, bigger than life. And I remember him calling me up, after we shot the first episode, with us going out on the mesa and with our tri-field meters, he called me as I was on my way back to my home closer to Salt Lake, and I had to pull off the road because the reception's really bad. I'm sitting in my car with maybe 2 bars of reception, stars overhead. And he's like, Erik, we can't do this without you. I appreciate your willingness to do this first episode. I really want you to consider, staying with us, for this endeavor. And he also says something else funny. He says, Erik, you need to make your peace with the fact that you're not normal. But, I had some great conversations with Kevin, who is very persuasive, as Brandon will tell you. And so, going back to the deliverable, if we can promote a higher level, look, I'm not delusional. I realize this is just moving the needle, but if we can promote a little more epistemic humility, in particular, if we can do a little more introspection, there's this whole us and them narrative that a lot of people entertain, this sort of conspiratorial. You have people with their grand unified theories of everything, with which they engage on an almost religious level. If we can figure out a way to more gracefully handle that and engage with each other, I think we will have succeeded in what may be an even more important mission than answering any particular question relative to the phenomenon. I hope that didn't come across as too preachy.
No, not at all. Nope.
That's a great answer.
It was. We've got a lot of tech that you use on there, and this is one of the things that I absolutely love about what's happening out there with yourself and also Dr. Travis Taylor, bringing the science into this, because that's exactly what is needed. Now, there is some maybe metaphysical things happening, also, but I mean, the science is really, truly important. And a lot of people, one of the main themes of the questions I was getting is about the GPS. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the first question I'd like to ask you is, do you build your own GPS circuit boards? Do you build your own that go up in the rockets, or do you buy them someplace?
Awesome. Thank you for asking this. I got to say, even as recently as yesterday, I've received some questions from people who are paying attention. God bless you. Paying attention to this question of the GPS. And I think it would be worth, if you'll pardon me, going back to the origin story of why are we dealing with GPS at all? Where did this come from? Mm-hmm. How are we implementing it? How shall I say this? Can we, in fact, take the readings at face value? Are there better ways to do this? All of this is on the table. And I had a very insightful comment shared with me by someone whose message to me made pretty clear that we haven't really taken the ball into the end zone on explaining where this comes from, what we're thinking, and why we're doing it. So I would really like to lay that out for you guys.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So the idea of using the global positioning satellite constellation, mm-hmm. It comes from me. I had this idea late 2017, early 2018. I broached this with Brandon. Of course, he does not identify as a physicist, but he and I have had some very good physics-related conversations. I've also had this conversation with some of the what I would say are some of the conspicuous players in this narrative before our time. Mm-hmm. I was looking to bring in some assistance with the theoretical treatment of the following idea. Okay. We know that global positioning satellite signals require exquisite timing. We're talking nanosecond timing, right? We know that there are even what we call relativistic corrections made in order for the computed positions to even be useful to us, to be accurate. That's taking into consideration the what we describe as the warping of space-time, or the bending of space-time by Earth's gravitational field, right? There's a lot of different vocabulary. I hope you'll pardon me for being a little messy when I use the common vernacular. But so the idea is, we have this, again, all the X-Files themes. We have the idea of maybe some kind of interdimensional thing going on, maybe traversable wormholes, windows into other places, through other dimensions. We have the idea of craft of some kind. Even the orb narrative kind of goes into exotic physics. And well, a lot of this stuff seems to indicate the presence of some sort of GR, or general relativistic effect, which might change the shape of local space-time, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of doubling down on this. Not doubling, I guess I'm calling the bluff on this when I say, well, look, if I've got satellites in middle Earth orbit, I've got this, multi-billion-dollar array of satellites up there, and all I've got to do is bring a GPS receiver at ground level into the picture. Well, if I just monitor the output of that receiver, or better yet, an array of them, then if we do see the emergence, the evolution, or the propagation of something that's changing local space-time, then we should see changes in the inferred positions of those stationary receivers. And I actually do have a visual that I can share with you. Okay. If and when you decide you want to see it.
Sure.
It's this concept of a thing called the light garden. So the original light garden concept was basically a bunch of obelisks, or a bunch of posts, if you will, across the property on a Cartesian grid, each of them having all of the standard physics metrics, including, the magnetic field, just EM stuff, ionic abundances, gas sensors, and of course, deviations from known GPS positions of fixed GPS receivers. And the idea is you put this array of sensors out in the field, and if you have something introduced into the space, let it be what we're calling the blob, let it be some sort of an invisible UAP/UFO. And please understand, I'm just using the terminology. I'm not alleging, right? I'm not carrying water that I did not draw. I'm just saying, if we have these things in our space that are generating these effects, then we might see in our light garden effects. We might see effectively a space-time wake. Imagine a boat traveling through the water and creating an outward propagating ripple, or something of that, something like a shadow. And so the idea of using GPS has its origins in this sort of grandiose concept of this 512 acre sensor array. And so how did we sneak into this? Well, it took me a while to even get the idea well enough across that it became relevant. I don't think we did anything with GPS the first year, 2019, when we did we have GPS in the first season? Did we?
I don't remember.
I don't think so.
It's all a blur.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I was really, really pushing to do something like this, because I thought, heck, effectively this takes, a few hundred, maybe a few $1,000s worth of equipment, and it allows us to leverage billions of dollars of infrastructure and make a very large scale, very grandiose, very interesting experiment right here on the ranch. And so, I didn't quite sell it, I guess, the first year. Hell, I didn't even sell my own involvement the first year. Or I wasn't trying to. But then by the second year, I believe we did. I think that's when we introduced some cattle trackers. I think I have.
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Okay. So the reason we brought the cattle trackers in was not because we cared about where the cows were going. Not that that's potentially interesting. I guess if a cow suddenly disappears, that would be interesting, right? Given all that we hear about going on with cows. But really, all I cared about was the things in their ears. All I cared about was the little devices. Well, we got these little solar powered doodads that they ran on a system. I believe it's called LoRa, which is a very long range, low power, low data rate telemetry system. And what they would do is they'd receive a GPS. They'd receive the signals from the GPS satellites. They would take a time average of the position of the cow or the tag, and then they would report back to a base station, and they would log at a very, very low data rate. So you better believe once those stinking cows, I just said stinking cows, didn't I? Once those cows left the property, I have a love-hate relationship with these cows. All right.
We know.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So once we got the cows off, well, okay, before we take the cows off the property, let me tell you, some of the interesting stuff we saw were were hints of what I thought I might see, which are these sort of excursions in the data that suggested that the cows were actually going places they couldn't go. Right. They were up on the mesa. They were off the property. They were, all over the place, mostly in the field, but not always. And so obviously that opens up the question of, well, how good are your trackers? Are you getting multipath interference and all the other stuff that people like to lecture me about as if I don't know it. And so I found, all right, there's some support there. So let's do this. So as soon as we got the cows off the property, I said, Tom, this is to Thomas, get me those trackers. And he did. I cleaned them all up. And then I went around like Johnny Appleseed and I screwed them into fence posts and trees and the South Tower, different places across the ranch. And started data logging with the expectation that I would see some movement. I'd start to see some, movement. But what I was really looking for is whether the entire distributed array of these sensors, even at low data rate, would start to show, coherent movements.
Wow.
Where they start to give some evidence of maybe some geophysical process or some local interference, some kind of EMI, or maybe a space-time effect. And so I collected data for months and months and months, and of course it wasn't shown in the series. But I had some really neat excursions in the data. I had some that actually went like a half a mile away, and concurrent with all of that, we started having these events with some of the drones where they're very precise, real-time RTK positional reckoning systems also indicated very large deviations in their positions.
Wow.
And so you can see how the plot sort of thickens. And the idea here is to just build the case. Okay. I don't come into this. Number one, I don't come into this with a belief system relative to the craft or the traversable wormholes or anything like that. I'm just saying, hey, this is an elegant way to test this idea.
Right.
And I also acknowledge, and this is why I appreciate you asking the question. I want to be clear. Yes, there are multiple reasons for why we might see some of the crazy data that we're seeing. Okay, I think it would be premature. I think it would be jumping to a conclusion. It would even be potentially non sequitur to say, therefore, traversable wormholes.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
But I often say this, the absence of a positive is not the presence of a negative.
Right.
Yeah. Am I making sense?
Yeah. I've heard you say that before. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, we're just allowing the data to sort of condense like do, right? We're just allowing the data to self-assemble. And so you asked the question about the trackers. Yes, I built some of them by hand. The trackers that we got were made for rocketry. They were within the budget. Again, keep in mind, budgets matter. And, when you don't have when not everyone shares your zeal for a particular research emphasis, and they want to sort of hedge their bets and do, some other rather expensive activities, we don't go for, $3,000 a pop, pieces of hardware. We don't go for the top shelf hardware. Right. What do? Well, we progressively go from cattle tags to devices that are made for rocketry. And yes, surprisingly, even though it's kind of like trying to solder coarse ground pepper to a PCB, I did the work. I built several of them, and then we had some of them built. And yes, they've been used in rockets, and they've been used in canisters thrown out of the helicopter, and they've been used in stationary modes and sort of all that good stuff. They are not the most sophisticated GPS trackers that we can get. But what they do is they help us to then, as we say, we're kind of bootstrapping or we're following the data, and it justifies the expenditure of even more resources. I love the question, as you can tell.
Well, we got a lot of information.
Yeah, it is. And that's one of the things, we see that, especially on the episodes that just aired, we see there, with the rockets and you're in the command center looking at your screens that are there in front of you, and the rocket shoots up a couple thousand feet, or 1,500 feet in the air, and yet the GPS data is telling you that it went sideways and into the mesa.
Yes. And it's results like that that account for the facial expressions for which I'm so famous, right?
That's all Erik wrote. Yeah.
right. I mean, it's going to become a freaking like a meme or something, I'm sure. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this, and if you want to know what's going through my mind when I see this is, oh no, because look, none of our systems are infallible. First of all,
right.
None of them are immune to multiple failure modes. Now, what are some of the failure modes? Some are not interesting. Some of the failure modes are quite interesting, and some of them are downright exotic. And so, I look at the very same set of issues as anyone who's familiar with GPS technology is going to raise in our discussions, which, by the way, I welcome. Are we perhaps stressing these units that were made for rocketry when we launched them on rockets? I don't know. I didn't design them. Might we be dealing with what we call EMI or electromagnetic interference? I think sometimes we have evidence of that. Could it just be that the environment is so harsh? I mean, it gets so hot, right? We also have problems with, as we know, this is well documented, battery-powered systems often experience sudden voltage drops. Well, what if we're power starving these things? All of these things are in scope, guys. Again, you're talking to a product development guy. Look, there's more than one potential answer here. So I would not look at the data, nor would I wouldn't encourage anyone to look at the data and say, okay, that is hard and fast proof of some sort of a space-time effect. Right. But it's also at least support for the line of thinking, right? And one of the things I can promise, I think, is that we're going to continue with the deployment of more and more increasingly sophisticated systems that have, features like anti-spoofing, if you know what that is. Do you know what spoofing is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Go ahead and explain if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So this term spoofing, it really is what it sounds like. If someone is injecting signals into the space and causing erroneous, like technologically, I'm talking not aliens, I'm talking human beings, potentially bad actors, whatever, injecting signals into the local space and causing shifts in GPS measurements. That would be like spoofing. It would be causing you to get erroneous data.
Right.
There's also just jamming, which can be technological in origin, or it could just be, just a kind of a perfect storm in the electromagnetic environment in which there's so much noise. Keep in mind, GPS signals are very, very weak. They're way down in the noise, or it's really hard to pick them out. I say in the noise; they're just barely above the noise, right?
Right.
And it's a very subtle, clever technology. There's an entire population of geniuses who developed this system. So a lot smarter than me. And these signals are not immune to all sorts of error, including, you heard me mention multipath interference. Okay. And I'm guessing you can intuit what that means. Imagine a signal coming down either. I wish I had one here. Let's pretend that this thing is our GPS receiver, right? This is an ESP32, but it'll do. All right. And so let's imagine that we have a pathway directly from the satellite, coming to this guy, and there's a certain timing associated with the arrival of that signal, right? And let's imagine that signal can instead bounce. I'm going to go right into the camera and come back to this guy. So now we have multiple pathways for the GPS signal to arrive at our receiver. That can be confusing to the receiver. That's called multipath interference. Okay. So things of that nature are all on the table. And what we're simply doing, especially with the addition of the Omnitech hardware, I hope I'm not like flooding you with too much information here, but we have Jim Royston, Sam DeRizzo, the whole Omnitech team. So those guys have been bringing on GPS receivers at my request that have a lot of this anti-spoofing, some of this error detection capability that some of these less expensive devices do not.
Right. Yep.
Fantastic topic. I could show you I could try doing a screen share. You want to try doing it
Sure.
related to the GPS?
Yeah.
I want to move on.
Yeah.
While you're bringing it up, can I ask you another question that's related to this?
Yeah, sure.
So there's been a lot of conversation around obviously the anomalous areas of the ranch, and with science, you generally have a control, right? So have you guys done these types? I mean, I can't imagine it would make for great television, but have you done similar tests on different parts of the ranch or in a different area
Yes.
that would be considered your control? You
Yes.
have, and
That's the kind of
there.
thing, Shannon, that's the kind of thing that's where I feel a lot more comfortable, putting together controlled experiments.
Mm-hmm.
And you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. Look, it's not watching paint dry. It's watching dry paint.
Oh yeah.
Okay? Science isn't always the most, again, going back to Kevin Burns, this is one of my favorite comments from him. Kevin Burns, in the first meeting we had, and I was just there in a support role. I wasn't going to be in it, right? And I'm sitting in a chair at this table with all these execs and stuff. And Kevin's like, well, we can't make good television with Erik sitting around staring into monitors waiting for something to happen.
That's what science is.
And he was absolutely right, And so it is. And so it is with experiments that have very careful controls, experiments that build a statistical support rather than a one-off. Goodness, I hope I'm not. Listen, I don't want to speak out of turn, and this is not pejorative. This is not a complaint. I want you and I want our viewers to understand that what we're doing is casting a broad net as we vet and explore this. That we're vetting the narrative still, even this many years later, and we are exploring the interface between what we actually know and what we don't know. And a lot of times, when I get a piece of data, whether I ascribe, exotic origins to it or not, the question that comes up in my mind is this piece of data that I have, this thing floating around over the road at HS2, right? Or this thing in the carriage house, or whatever it is that we like to talk about. One of the first things I want to do is go to anyone who is an eyewitness or a former investigator and say, is this the kind of thing that you're talking about? Is this what you saw? Because for goodness sakes, I don't have access to that mythological treasure trove of data that sits presumably somewhere in Las Vegas or wherever.
Hidden and abundant.
What I'd really like to know is, is what I'm seeing typical of what has historically been recorded and talked about? Is it the same class of thing? And so, do we have controls? Yes, but not always. In fact, I would say the kinds of experiments for which we have controls are in the minority, and they're even at that. I often shoot holes through my own tools and methods. Look, and this goes back to what I was saying to Brandon about the emphasis. If the emphasis was to do a body of work that we were going to submit for peer review, the approach would be different. Okay. And I think anyone who's expecting us to expose ourselves to that type of scrutiny is delusional. Okay. Until we have data that I think ascends to that level,
right.
Coming out of these vetting exercises and these broad sort of, casting a broad net type of experiments, which we wouldn't otherwise be able to do without bringing in our documentary partners, at least not on the scales that you've seen.
Right.
Until we derive a set of experiments from that body of work that we can then crank down, controls, get statistical bases for them. I'm just not really interested in this. This is not a battle that I want to fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things that people were asking about, especially with the rocket launches that, like I had mentioned earlier, that were not going up 1,500 feet, but they were actually going sideways and heading in towards the mesa and underground and things like that. And so they were asking me, and of course I thought, well, they probably are. I haven't seen it on TV, but going away from the anomalous areas and shooting a rocket up, and does it go up?
It's really interesting. It's interesting the inferences that people draw. In fact, a lot of times people are noticing things. Look, whether or not it's relevant is almost initially secondary, right? It's just, okay, let's just, what are the things we can say about the data? What qualitatively can we say? And with the understanding that it's a low yield proposition, with the understanding that, we're probably going to see a lot of connections that aren't really real, just like constellations, right? Mm-hmm. I often refer to constellations of facts. You know what I'm talking about? Like the stars are real, but the lines between them aren't.
Right.
There's not a big guy with a bow and arrow up there, right? There's not a big bear up there, but we're trying to understand these relationships between the different pieces of data. And so what you just said is a good example. Noticing that things are moving away from putatively anonymous areas, right? That could be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It could be. And so then we decide, we weigh it in the balance and say, well, do we have means of following up on this? If so, what's our hypothesis? Is it testable? Is it falsifiable? If so, let's have at it.
Right. Yep. That repeatability, that's one thing that I really, to me, that's one of the scientific methods is if you can repeat it, then it's more of a scientific, the data is more of a fact then at that point, because it can repeat it, especially, and this is something I've talked about with the anomaly that we have seen now in the Triangle area, where you have this, I'm going to call it the vortex, or when you had the LiDAR that was from Jim Royston, and he flew when he flew his LiDAR drone over that area, and you had that circle, and then it had that dark spot in the center of no return, I guess that would be. I know Mike would probably be better at explaining this than I am. And then he was out on the first episode. I think it was the first episode, might have been the second one, where they were just doing some testing. They weren't even ready to record or do anything yet. And they picked up another donut-shaped type anomaly in that area.
Hey, Jeff, I've got a question for you about that.
Yes.
Where did you get that context about, in particular, what the actual intent was and what they were ready for? I'm really interested in, because I haven't seen the final cut material.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to know, because what you said is right, but I'd like to know where you got that.
It was on the show. It was actually on the show.
They said they were just setting up.
They were setting up.
It wasn't anything specific.
Good. Right. Okay. So this is, again, I want to say this diplomatically, which usually is a preface to something that may not be so diplomatic, right? Believe me, I've read some people the riot act on a few things. How do I say this? So sometimes in the interest of continuity, in the interest of a coherent story that people can get their heads around, we have to select, I believe the calculation was 0.87, less than 1% of the material, the discourse, the actual footage from which to assemble a portable, deliverable story. And sometimes it's necessary to create that sort of interstitial glue, right? That sort of, how do we get from not having the data to having the data? Mm-hmm. And we do a pretty good job of representing the whys and wherefores, but this is an instance in which I would say we spectacularly left out some context.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
And I don't want to delve into an area where you're not supposed to talk about. So
well, no, it's not like that. Let me just say this. If any of us thought that we were following up, like in earnest, on some of the very puzzling data that we had at that we presented at the conclusion of the previous season, mm-hmm. If any of us thought that activity was going to produce anomalous data, you better believe we would have been out there with bells on.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Okay, and this is where, honestly, kind of put my elbows out a little bit here. Look, I'm the principal investigator. Mm-hmm. If I thought we were going to do something that was that ascended to that level of importance, you better believe I'd be there, set up with every piece of gear. Mm-hmm. I think what's remarkable and what's really cool, even and let's give everybody a fair treatment in this. They have to come up with stuff for Travis. Travis has to say certain things to get us from A to B. Right. In his very well executed sort of narration of things. But we did not just send them out there as, oh yeah, we're going to throw it over the wall. You're going to follow up on one of the most amazing results we got last year. Yeah. No, absolutely not. That's not how I run my program. No. So but the remarkable thing about it is they went out there in a due diligence mode. I had spent days with Jim Royston collecting all kinds of control data on this real-time GPS stuff that you'll see, the sort of Mission Impossible dots. We're actually, I developed a system for bringing down the data and displaying it in the 3D model in an interactive way. And so we had done a lot of testing of that. And Jim, you better believe Jim wanted to know that his systems were working, especially, can you just imagine? He had almost an entire year to think about what he had shared ostensibly with the world.
Right.
So the backstory here, I think, is a lot more interesting from the perspective of the engagement of the participants in that measurement. He was not going out there with the expectation that he was going to get some puzzling
Great thing,
geometric result.
Right.
Right.
And I want to say that it's hopefully I've said this in a way that is fair to everyone in the ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really interesting. And you had said as soon as you got that data, you were like, all right, let's get out there. Let's grab our
Back
stuff
everything up
right now while it's happening. Let's get out there immediately and while something is happening and start collecting data and do our experiment that we wanted to do. So you guys and again, this is one of those things that I say quite often when I'm talking about other TV shows that are reality like this one, like yours, is to say that there's there's the production side and then there's the actual investigation side.
Right.
The production side is there to create a TV show that people will watch. They can make money. That's their job. That's what they do. And I'm glad that you all, and I'm assuming this is true, that you all have more control over what is actually being put together for a TV show than some of the other ones.
It's a collaborative effort. Yeah, it's a healthy collaborative effort. Look, anytime we're not running a maximization or minimization algorithm, we're running an optimization algorithm, and that implies compromise.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And so, look, we do it in every aspect of life. So, in the interest of one of my favorite terms here, and I think Brandon really stresses this a lot, the work that we're doing with the documentary effort is synergistic. It allows us to engage with subject matter experts, or what we call SMEs. It allows us to connect with people out there in the world who have tools and methods and just experience and their CV are perfect for the problem set, which frankly we either wouldn't be able to access, or it would take a lot longer and a lot more resources locally if we were not doing the documentary work. So with those benefits, like gigantic swarms of drones and cutting edge equipment that's being brought out by people who develop their own technology, with those benefits, of course, we have to gracefully interface with the Hollywood ecosystem.
Absolutely.
And yes, there's a story to be told, and so we're all kind of putting our faith in each other. When the guys come out at the beginning of a summer of filming, 3.5, 4 months, whatever it is, they're taking a huge risk. They are deploying millions of dollars.
Yep.
Not knowing. I mean, again, we don't know. It's not like there's a button we can go push and make the phenomenon do whatever we want.
Right.
There's a very real possibility every time these brave souls, I don't want to trade places with them, but every time they pony up to bring, people and resources and, aggregate all this stuff. And after a brainstorming session, usually involving myself and Travis and other members of the team and certainly production folks, they don't know if they're going to get anything. They don't know if there's going to be anything that they can put in the can and turn into TV.
Right.
And so that's a leap of faith on their part.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, they're kind of falling into our arms or into the ranch's arms. Right. And then on the flip side, as principal investigator with us, ostensibly I have my reputation, if that matters anymore. I have that at stake, right?
It matters.
And so I'm saying, okay, look, I'll give you some input on how you, like if I see the rough cut material, for example, or maybe as we're having our conversations when the cameras aren't rolling, I say, look, you got to say this way. Don't say it that way, or no, leave that out. That won't work. Mm-hmm. But once I've given my input, that's it. And it's up to them.
Right.
And I think what they've done is a spectacularly good job in just about every instance.
Yeah.
It's good material. Every time I see it, it gives me chills. I'm like, wow, I lived through that. I wonder if those expressions show up on my face so much.
One last follow-up question on this one, and then I'll let Mike go. About getting back to the GPS and the rockets, and I think Mike actually might have had brought this question up earlier when we were kind of preparing for this. Was that we know that you have and how you're doing it, we have no idea, but the real-time GPS data that you're watching on the screen and
Yes.
going flat.
Yes.
Is it also recorded on the unit itself?
Oh, great question. I like these tech questions. Look, I'm only a tech guy because I have to be. Those are the tools, right? But if I'm being honest, I'm actually a lot more interested in obviously the physics side of this, the theoretical physics side of this. But on the tech side, this is where the rubber hits the road. So what are we doing? All right. So, and again, if I should have thought I wish I had some of these units I could hold up so I could show you. This talks to this. So what we have is a GPS antenna. It is obviously getting the signals from the satellites. Data is going into a micro SD card on board. Although sometimes, and I would even say often, there is corruption of the data on the board for whatever reason.
Okay.
It does happen. But we also have a 915-ish megahertz downlink. Okay. That is, for those who are worried about FCC stuff, yeah, it's all legal. We're not stomping on anyone. The power levels are not such that, there'd be any problems with this.
Right.
And so what's happening is strings of GPS data are being sent to a receiver. The receiver is then plugged into a piece of equipment here on the network. Then the data is accessed in real time, and it's getting put into a model. You guys know I use Blender. It could be anything. You could use Unreal Engine or whatever to display this stuff. And so what you're seeing, like if you see, I know this question is going to come up, gaps in the data, right? Real-time data. I know where this is going. Those gaps are in the signal as broadcast in real time from the receiver to from the GPS receiver, and then rebroadcast to a secondary receiver into the network and so on. Those gaps do not necessarily correspond to gaps in the actual GPS data that is logged or would be logged if the SD card is working.
That's where I wanted to go.
Interesting.
Perfect question. Perfect question. For those who are willing to endure it, I would take you by the hand and walk you through the whole process.
I would, honestly, but I know we only got about a half an hour left, and I don't want to.
I know.
This is so fascinating.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had because, and I know Mike had talked about it earlier, but yeah. So how does that data that's recorded on the unit differentiate from what we see in the real-time data? So.
I can tell you that in some of the I wish I'd watched this more recently so I could know exactly what to navigate around here. If you see, I'm just going to say this very generically, if you see gaps in the data, especially if they are recurring gaps in the data, let's say, if you see gaps in the data, it would be wise not to assume that they are gaps in the actual GPS signals as received by the units. Okay.
Good.
What I want you to understand is that we're seeing this kind of alignment of data. What we call this sort of a breakdown in data communication. At multiple frequencies. It might, in some cases, affect the 1.6 ish gigahertz GPS signals, but we're also talking, 2.4, 5.8, and the 915 megahertz. We're talking about regions where, for whatever reason, we're running into difficulty getting signals in and out of that space. And that's the interesting part. I would encourage us not to niggle too much with, is it on the SD card or not on the SD card or whatever, although I'm perfectly happy to share that. I just don't want to go into a conversation that is incorrectly premised.
Okay. Understood. Yep. Very good. Mike, you're up, man. What do you got?
I don't even know where to start. Well, let's keep going with GPS because I like the GPS line because it's data and you can work with data. One of the questions that I had was you talked about the way that just like, for instance, the cow tags and how sometimes if they did show some shifting,
yes,
there's been a lot of that. And that's one way to try and you've got a problem to try and determine what's causing that in the first place.
Yes.
But there's also the other side, which is how many satellites are currently visible to a GPS receiver.
It varies widely.
Right. And if you had an array, and let's just say using Travis's example of a cloaked Klingon spaceship.
I'm trying to show you my screen share. I'm sorry.
If that parks itself over top of, say, the triangle, and you have an array of GPS receivers, you could look at which satellites they could see and not see, and see a hole in the sky because of which satellites they can see and not see. Something's blocking that signal in some cases. So
bless you. You said it perfectly. Okay. Now I will say this. It may not be a hole in the sky. Let's imagine, and you know what? So I have taken a laser pointer and put it through a diffraction grating and created, an array of dots, and shined it through it's a rectangular basin of water, and I've had a map of the ranch on the table, and I try to illustrate the idea of GPS signals coming down. And you know where this is going. And then I put a ripple in the water, right? And you can see the laser moving around. This is a really fun exercise. And I wanted to do this because I thought it was really visual, but it never gets into the series. We're going to do it on here, And so
good.
But the idea is that we might not be looking so much at a hole, but at simply something like imagine a sphere of glass, right? Mm-hmm. Something
distortion.
That is bending. Yes, a distortion. Exactly. Yeah. And so I've actually simulated that. I do a lot of stuff in Blender. So I've created an array, just like you're talking about, Mike. And I have a sort of a stand-in for a UAP. And I have a portrayal, a model, a conceptual model that I could share that speaks right to what you're talking about.
Please.
Now, if you will walk me through what it takes to share a screen,
okay. Yes,
I'll do it.
All right. Yes. All right. So what you do is you go down to present, and then you go to probably the bottom one. And mine says
share a screen.
Yep, share screen, and then the choice is probably entire screen, and then you can pick the screen. It has to be on your computer, from your computer that you're on.
All right. Well, let's see if I mess this up.
Okay. And then once you share it there, then I'll see it, and then I'll bring it on.
All right. Do you see the content?
Yes, I see it.
All right. Is it dynamic? Is it moving?
Yes.
Okay. All right, guys. Behold the light.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Look.
Wow.
Yay.
Yeah. Okay. So I made this because I feel like, look, we all learn better when we have something interactive and something visual, right? Yep. And so what you see here is a model. And forgive me if this gets clumsy because I'm actually accessing another machine using VNC and all this other stuff. So we have a. Yeah. Okay. This is great. So you see, I can move it around.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And you see my lovely stand-in for a UAP.
Yep.
Right. This is gratuitous as heck, I know, but I think it makes the point well. Mike, you're smiling. All right, that's a good sign.
This is awesome.
All right, so I'm going to grab my UAP. Okay, so let me set this up right. So the light garden. Remember, I talked about a Cartesian grid of sensors, and let's suppose we set up the system so that in our mind's eye, we've got these posts out in the field. And at the top of every post, we have a light whose brightness corresponds to the deviation, let's say, of the current GPS reading from sort of the boxcar average or the known position of our sensor, right? The error. Mm-hmm. Okay. Or it could be some other metric. It could be if we take the vector magnitude, the B field, the magnetic field, or any other metric that we're interested in, and we look for coherent patterns, like a wake of some kind, as a result of something that we may or may not see in the intervening space between the satellites in middle Earth orbit, all the GNSS stuff, including GPS, and our sensors on the ground. Okay, now with that set up, we've got basically every one of those, I'm pointing over here at the screen, every one of those points that you see, those little spheres, is independently calculating something based upon time and its positional relationship to my UAP, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the UAP, and I want to show you an example of something that we might see from our light garden. Okay. So if I can grab it, come on, UAP.
Yeah, they don't like to cooperate sometimes, you know. Oh, there it goes.
There you see what's happening?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Sure.
this is
Okay,
amazing.
So
Oh
I
my
want you to
gosh.
imagine. Yeah, I had fun making this.
This
had
is
fun doing all
so
this stuff.
cool.
Okay, actually, what you're seeing is one of the fun components of what I do. Making TV is probably not my favorite part. I think others will tell you that.
I get it.
Okay, but let's imagine we've got, you know, this thing, this craft, this effect, this I'm going to call it the effect generator, passing through our space. Okay, and obviously with proximity to our sensor array, the effect grows. Right, it's quite spectacular. Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Whereas, you know, here I'm doing something like an inverse square law or something. It doesn't matter. So what I've just shown you is something that I've seen in my head, for better or worse, since 2017. I've had this in my head since, and that's why we're doing GPS, and that's why we're sneaking up on, hopefully, a robust system for measuring whether it be geophysical effects, atmospheric effects, things that might be associated with like the geomagnetic storms that we see, possibly exotic physics having to do with, you know, the things that Travis is so eloquently presented. I love the aspirational stuff. I don't, you know, heck, science fiction, I love it. You know, it's got science plus imagination in it. It's real science.
Yep.
Right. And so let it be associated with what we call the anomaly over the triangle. As you said, you know, I loved it. You set it up perfectly, Mike. You know, right over the triangle, right?
Yep. Right.
You know, so whatever it is, whether it's technological or natural or whatever in origin, you know, my desire is to be able to image that, to at least tomographically, you know, at least get a slice of whatever the effect is. And if it's Mother Nature, great. You know, that's another show. Nature's Got Talent, right?
Indeed.
Right. But the point here is to just augment our natural senses and give us, you know, a greater awareness of some of the really cool physics that's playing out all around us and even passing through us. And so if we were to build something like this, probably impractical light garden, we might come into possession of data like we see here and be able to, you know, with some appropriate fitting, we may be able to come up with, you know, coherent patterns like we see here. I hope this is appealing, you know, because this is
absolutely. Oh my gosh, yeah! Everybody in the chat is going, that is so wild.
Yeah, well, see, I have fun making stuff like this, and you know what? Look. You know, I just had my 55th birthday on last Christmas. My point being, none of us is too old to learn some new tricks. And as I do this stuff, I'm learning. And that's one of the joyful things about engagement with this context, is picking up whatever skills I need in order to get ideas across. Who knows? You know, maybe someone else will come in and take a look at this and go, oh, Erik, you're missing this. You need that, you know? And so it's this kind of synergistic discourse. When I talk about elevating the discourse, this is what I want to do. So this is my contribution to that.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Good
it
stuff.
truly is. Yeah, and I can't wait to see this in action.
Hey, me neither. I've been waiting a long time.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about where we are to sort of button this up.
Yeah.
You know, you may have seen in social media, you may have seen some announcements from Brandon, who infamously will post a picture. If I take a picture of something, he will post it. And so you may have seen Jim and Sam during the installation of some of the Sentinel boxes. I've come up with a name for them, but I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't know if they like it. I give all the crazy names to things out here. So those boxes at these power and network nodes are the beginnings of realizing our light garden. They're kind of the main nodes, and you know we can do something with you know gadgets like this, you know, IoT devices interspersed, or maybe you know do local studies like at the triangle or along the fence line or out at the homestead or whatever, and we can start to build this picture. And look, if all we get is noise, then okay, it's noise, and we have falsified that specific hypothesis. Then we move to the next thing. But if we get some of the things that I think we're going to get, we're going to be glad we did it.
Oh yeah. I think you will, and we can't wait. I mean, honestly, and that's what's so fascinating about all of this, truly, because we get to watch this all happening through your eyes, and everybody, all the cast members' eyes.
Isn't that interesting?
As you go through this, we get to experience it through your eyes as you go through, and I have learned, I have to tell you, and that's why I call you Professor Bard, because honestly, I have learned so much from watching this show and also from the insider programming and listening to you explain things and watching you sitting. You one day, I remember this was a while back, and I don't want to dwell on the insider program too much, but watching you were actually sitting there working, soldering and stuff, and working on stuff as you were talking to us. Mm-hmm. And you were explaining things in a way that I could understand. And I thought, this is fascinating information. I could never achieve the level of, a physicist that you are, but I mean, I get so much more understanding of it all by watching and listening to you. And I got to applaud you for that, because it's awesome that you're taking us in those new areas. So I told Shannon she were up next to ask another question. We're getting close here, and I hate this, but Shannon, what you got?
Well, I'm not going to introduce anything new, because I think that would for sure take us way over. So I will just piggyback on what we've been talking about.
Okay, all right.
Which are, you're showing this light garden, and I have a million questions. Well, that's an exaggeration. I have several questions that come into my head. In practicality, what would it take for you to build to actually have something like that? And on top of that, what is the likelihood, with all of the difficulty with electronics and all of that stuff, that you'd be able to safeguard against interference so that it would be worth it?
These are spot on questions. To your first question, $1 billion.
$1 billion.
Perfect. No, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. Depending on the platform, like, these little things here, these are really cool, by the way. These little IoT devices, they're so powerful. They can do so many things. They got all this general purpose input-output capability, and I'm building things that are simultaneously doing like security and science and stuff out of them.
That's awesome.
And we're talking about something that costs $10.
Oh wow.
Maybe even less than that, depending on quantities. Okay, and then you get the sensors and you put those on there, and this is stuff that, quite frankly, anyone, and without exception, anyone in our midst could pick up these skills, get into this tool set, and start experimenting with environmental measurements, very similar to what I'm talking about in the light garden concept. Mm-hmm. So realistically, though, when you talk about the infrastructure, how do you get the data? What's the pipeline? How do you get the data back to the command center? How do you get it back into the Athena platform, which we haven't talked about really here? My preference has always been to use minimally invasive power and data pathways. One of the big concerns I have is, am I changing, and I'm going to use a little bit of physics terminology here, am I changing the equipotential structure of the ranch, meaning the shape of the fields on the ranch, by running a bunch of copper? Yeah. Or am I changing the RF environment, which certainly I am, if I'm putting a bunch of Wi-Fi all over the place? Right. I've been criticized for being so light-handed or so reticent to do these things, but the truth is, this is CSI. Okay, we don't want to change the crime scene, or we want to do the least invasive things first, and then progress towards the irreversible steps, or the more invasive things. So if it were up to me, there would be fiber optic running to absolutely each and every one of those dots you saw on the screen.
Yep.
Okay, it wouldn't be Wi-Fi. It wouldn't be copper, in other words, Ethernet or anything like that. It would be fiber optic. Why? Because, drawing a little bit, on what maybe we all know about materials science and, conductors versus insulators and so forth, that something like a fiber optic line has minimal electromagnetic impact on the environment. It's also immune to EMI. Electromagnetic interference, ingress of signals from the outside, messing with it on an electrical level, because it's optical. So this could get really expensive really fast. As you can imagine, trying to run a bunch of fiber optic line all over Skinwalker Ranch. That's 512 acres, guys. Yeah, some of it on Mesa. And so look, it's a it's a concept, not a delusion, right? I would estimate the cost, going back to your first question. It's probably a $1 to $2 million undertaking.
Wow.
Is that all? We can do that.
Shannon, let's work. Hey, maybe I'll dig into my pockets. You dig into.
We got it. We're good.
And what was the second question? You had a good question. The second one was really good.
Well, I think you started to answer it
Okay.
with how you planned on what you would do in practicality. But how would you? I mean,
how to roll it out?
Yeah, I guess. But also, you can't plan for unpredictability. You can predict that it will be unpredictable. So if you spend $2 million and you do the fiber optics and you do all of this.
Yeah.
How do you safeguard against there being
yes
interference with it otherwise, just because technically it shouldn't be interfered with doesn't mean that it won't be.
Yeah, once we get beyond the sort of, the initial courtship with this problem set, once we get beyond the bagash and bagali, wow, that's the strangest thing I ever saw again and again and again. Once we get beyond the novelty of it, we want to start understanding what the hell is really going on, right? And I'm already way out ahead of that wave, I got to say. I'm very impatient about this stuff. But, I want to share things that will withstand the kind of scrutiny, that have the kind of rigor that will, potentially go into a peer review circumstance if we can figure out who the hell the peers are in the first place, given the context. And so one of the things we do need to safeguard against is, the corruption of the data itself. At some point, the injection of garbage signal, because we get garbage in, garbage out. And that's been one of the real drivers in my conversation with Jim and Sam and some of the other guys at Omnitech when we talk about the AI. Because AI is not immune. There's some really good material on YouTube about crazy things that have happened with AI when the inputs were bad. That's funny stuff. But, I've said, we need like an AI to monitor the AI. We need tiers of oversight, and we need those offsite controls, and we need to be able to inject our own signature data sets into the stream and look for those, kind of like, think of injecting a signal and looking in the Fourier analysis for that signal to come back out, right? Right. Or like, what do they call them? Fiducial marks, when you're lining up. You would know this, Mike.
Oh,
yes.
Like when you're doing semiconductor mask design and that sort of thing. So, there are things that we want to put into the signal, not to create data, not to spoof anything, but to see that it is recoverable, that it's intact, that it hasn't been corrupted by something, in the pipeline. And so those kinds of things are, in fact, a major part of the discussion, and that's where the devil is, those details.
Wow.
The other advantage to putting that much infrastructure onto the ranch is it would give the cows so much more to play with.
That's it. I'm out of here.
Not just the cows.
I got to tell you, those cows have chewed everything. They've chewed and stomped everything I put in the field.
You provide so many enrichment exercises for them, Eric.
Yeah. It's true.
That's so many things to rub on and stomp on.
Oh my goodness!
Now, see, people are kind of getting a peek at why we were laughing so much coming into this.
It's always the cows. It always goes back.
Oh, the cows! And the cow jokes and all that. I came up with another one last night. I said, some people have speculated. There's wide speculation that the cows are, in fact, interesting to the aliens. You realize I'm joking here, right? Because they're radioactive. In fact, cows do emit high levels of muons. Okay.
Nuance.
I got you.
Nuance. Really?
I got that. I'm accustomed to laughing at dad jokes. So that was
all right.
A good
Yeah.
one.
So I've been branded. There's another one with being the bad dad joke maker.
No,
I think it might not be dad jokes. It might be grandpa jokes.
It was a great dad joke.
Yeah, all right.
It was a great cow dad joke.
Yeah. Look, guys, if you keep coming with questions like this, I'll come back anytime you want.
Oh,
perfect.
I gotta say too that this we gotta have you back. Everybody's on here going, Jeff, you gotta have him back. You gotta.
Oh yeah.
Back. Yes, I know. And they want to take up a bake sale and a GoFundMe to help you. So you never know.
Yeah, I've never heard that before.
Easy, $2 million. You'll have that garden before
Is
you
it
know
like you do it like this, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Honestly, I don't want to give an overly austere picture of what we're doing here. Now that wouldn't be fair to anyone involved. It's that there's a right way to do it. If you're going to spend, like, let's just say it this way. If you're going to spend $100,000, or you're going to spend, and it's not my nickel. If you're going to spend $1 million, you don't want to step and repeat. You don't replicate something that isn't right. Right. So it comes down to tools and methods, and frankly, the knowledge of the people involved. I have some. I tend to be on the visionary side of things. I do have, some breadth to my technical background. But we need to engage with the folks who can really take it all the way home, and that is a big part of the motivation for our engagement with Jim and Sam, the guys whom you've seen out here on the property.
Yep. Yeah, and I know we're going to see more. We've one of the guys who have become a great friend of mine and to the show is Pete Kelsey, of course.
I can't say enough good about this guy.
Yeah, I know, and he's fantastic. And we got Chris Bartell is in the chat right now. And
fantastic guy.
Yeah,
they're both wonderful.
Yeah.
Chris, I have treasured every minute of time I've had with Chris.
Yep, and one of these days we'll have to talk to Ben from the museum of the biologist that you guys have now introduced in this season. So because Ben has really shared some great information with us too. So
I'll tell you something. I told the Prometheus guys, if you guys don't build a show around this guy, you are missing the boat.
Oh, really? Yeah. If you say that, I'm on board with that, because
I'm telling you, Ben is one of those very unique individuals. He's got, his background, not to steal any thunder, but just to set him up. We're talking, the botany side, the word escapes me, insects, whatever field that is, entomology.
Entomology.
Yeah. Obviously, he's a falconer, so he obviously knows a lot about the avian dinosaurs, and just even really esoteric stuff like the mechanics of decay. For some reason I'm having trouble with nouns. Decomposition. Thank you. And so, there hasn't been a subject in the area of life sciences that Ben has not just really schooled me on, and it is a delight. And when you find someone with that level of enthusiasm and that depth of knowledge, it is just such a pleasure. I could just sit and listen to him all day.
That's great. And we get that enthusiasm from you, because listening to him, I thought right off the bat, I was like, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about. A lot of people were like, oh, the dire wolf. Oh my gosh. Why are they going there? That's so stupid.
Keep in mind, 0.87%.
I know. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to remind folks too.
Yes.
About that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's be fair to Ben.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. A lot of people.
I'll come out swinging if you're not fair to Ben.
Good. All right. We only got about 10 minutes to go, so I've got to make this quick. One area, and sorry, folks that submitted questions. I know we're going to have Erik back.
Hey, send them to me, right?
Okay. All right. And I mentioned this in the pre-show when we were talking about the living. Before we get to that actual question, I wanted to ask you this question. People have talked about an intelligence, something that is.
We've only got 10 minutes left. Do you think you can cover this question in 10 minutes?
Answer this in 10 minutes. All right.
In 20 words or less.
20 words about iLiving, and do you believe there's some sort of an intelligence?
There's no way.
Ready, set,
Next
go.
time. Stay tuned. That's our phrase now. Stay tuned.
All right. Let me do this then. To do justice to at least introduce the subject. This is something, as you heard me say before we came on. This is something that I have shared in a live setting, and with some pretty interesting folks whom Brandon has brought out as his guests. This is a reference to a real event that happened on January the 4th of 2018.
My birthday.
It's a story that could be misconstrued in a lot of ways. but I think it really brings home, literally for me, because I was at home when this played out. It brings home the question about, how do you really know something? And when it comes to this business of, is it a someone or a something, or, or both somehow, I find this, if we approach this topic the right way, it is both fun, it's intriguing, it's a bit spooky, it's humbling. It's all of those things for me. It's very provocative. I would love to share the narrative of that in a live setting. I'd like to walk you through it so that there aren't any misunderstandings about what it is that I think it means. Mm-hmm. If it means anything to me, it would be, Erik, next time, be more prepared.
Oh, well, okay.
Ominous.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't mean for it to be honest.
Your mood totally shifted. This is a total
shift. It puts me into a different mode of thinking, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So we're going to have an episode just on that because I know, and I know Shannon has a lot of, her and I have talked about, her field of studies, which really gets into the mind and all of that kind of stuff.
That's the stuff I want to know about. Teach me about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go.
So
we need another episode. This is a series now.
This will be the Erik Bard series we're going to do.
That's right.
This is episode number 1.
There you go. It's already done now. Sorry, Erik. We know that you love being on camera, and we've added more to your plate.
This is when you come from a very rural background and you raised on the farm, and it's like be useful, right? Play your position. I had a double dose of it. My stepfather was a basketball coach. So it's, play your position, do your job. If it's cows, let's put ourselves in the right place to take charge of the cows. If we're in the field, it's, lift whatever the weight is, do the dang work. You can't just talk about it. And so it's hard for me to find a balance between, where I feel comfortable with the talk versus the do, right? I feel very uncomfortable sometimes when I feel like the emphasis of our discourse is on the who and not on the what. I love conversations that are focused on the what. And quite frankly, I feel that I'm in my element when I'm actually out there in the field doing stuff, or when I'm coding or having good collaborative discussions with folks who have reached out. I've learned so much from just, I've been made to think things that I wouldn't otherwise think through the insider program, as well as, just people have reached out to me like through LinkedIn, which is the only social media that I have. No, I do not have Facebook. Contrary to whatever may be out there, right? Yeah. So, I'm happy to join as long as we have substantive discussions like the one we've had today. Otherwise I'm busy.
Yeah, I know. We know.
You don't say.
Yep. We've noticed.
Pathologically busy.
Yeah. What did you say when we were talking this morning on the Insider? We were talking this morning, and you said you were going to be a zombie tonight or something like that because you had very little sleep, probably.
I didn't sleep last night. Yeah.
Yeah. Folks, can you believe that? I mean,
well,
did you see the sunrise this morning?
Yes, I did. That was awesome.
How could I not stay up and share that as it was coming up? We had some remnants of aurora activity.
Yep.
Okay. And it's like, I'm not walking away from this. I might want to steer the cameras around. There might be something worth sharing. And so I felt like staying up. I felt like meeting the sunrise with everyone this morning.
Yeah.
We have a theory that because time moves differently on the ranch, that is why you don't sleep at all or age.
Oh, I do sleep. It's more of a crash. It's a crash, and it's not pretty.
Boots on or off?
On. Actually, you know what? That reminds me. I think it was Bryant who took a picture. It made me so mad. I think he took a picture of me. I had fallen asleep with one bare foot and one foot still in the boot. Because look, this filming business, this is a young person's game. All right.
Man.
When we get to the end of the day, I am so done.
Oh, I bet.
I can't imagine. I cannot imagine.
Yeah, I can't. I don't know if I can do another season of this. I don't. Honest to God, know if I can physically do it.
Yeah, you have to for us. All right, last question. Who's the funniest person in the whole cast and crew that's on when you guys are filming? Who's the funniest person out there?
Oh, casting crew. Oh, goodness.
Well, let's go cast first. All of you from, Dragon on down. Who do you think is the funniest person?
I wish there were subcategories of humor here. Because everybody all the way to William gets an honorable mention somewhere in this.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that Travis and I have had some just gut busting funny exchanges, right?
Yeah.
And there's a certain type of cerebral / Southern boy humor that he and I share.
It makes sense.
And then there are times when, between Thomas and I, Thomas will say something, and it's because intellectually we engage with like the more like confusing side of the ranch.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like the humor coming out of Thomas when Thomas and I interact. The reaction produces a humor whose purpose is to counterbalance how, quite frankly, sobering and chilling some of the things are. And so it's very intense. It's just got its own flavor. Bryant, I don't think I've met anyone who's better at doing impressions of people than Bryant.
Really?
He is. I was shocked at how funny he was.
Oh my gosh!
All the lives. I felt like I would have never guessed that from how they portray him on the show.
Yeah, and Caleb, I'm just going to pick on Caleb because he's so much bigger than I am. He's just
Caleb.
But some of the best jokes have actually been told by William.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. All right. So I tell you what, this has been absolutely fascinating. We have to do this again, Erik. And I have to say, I'm so honored for you to come on the podcast. I really, truly am. And I knew that we would end up with a situation where we didn't get to half the questions that we wanted to, but that's okay.
Do we ever?
No, we never do. And that's like when you do the Q&As on the Insider program, everybody's typing in all these questions, ahead of time. And then,
we have that thing coming up, don't we?
Yes, we
in
do.
like 2 minutes, you got to go.
Yeah, you have to go.
I was going to try to get out to the south. I guess I'm not going to the South Tower.
Oh, you got a half an
Just,
hour.
just run. No. It starts.
It starts at 7, right?
It starts in 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
It starts at 9 o'clock.
I haven't even done one of those things because of stuff. So I better jump onto that. Maybe
you just
hard enough for me.
Maybe
I'll just sit really quiet during that.
Yeah. Good nap.
Hey, thank you for having. Specifically, thank you for bringing these questions into the discourse. Very important questions. Seriously. Yes, I'm glad to be sitting in this chair, but I'd be glad if these questions got asked anytime of any of us.
Great. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mike and Shannon. Thank you guys for helping out with this. I knew I couldn't handle him by myself.
It takes a village.
No one can.
It takes a village.
Yeah.
All right, folks, that's all we got for you tonight. But thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We really do appreciate it. Stay tuned because we're going to twist Erik's arm to come back and give us some more. So appreciate it. We'll catch you next time right here on the J Free 906 podcast. Good night, everyone.